All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us on your Wednesday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country or world. We've come together today to talk about the topic of candidate ghosting, specifically how to eliminate it. We've found that ghosting is becoming an increasingly large problem in the world of recruiting. And it's really having a major impact on the bottom line for many organizations and impacting their hiring speed. So we've come together to get really focused and give you some really practical insights on how to eliminate ghosting. So let's dig in and get started. I've got a couple folks with me today I'm very excited to be talking with. I've done a webinar with both Scott and Craig recently, and every time I chat with them, I learn something new. Scott and Craig are a father-son duo that run a company called Blitz Media, focused on really helping. They work in a very particular niche inside of healthcare to help improve the recruiting processes for their clients. They run workshops. They're just very, very talented at what they do and are just a wealth of knowledge. So want to introduce both Scott and Craig. Gentlemen, say hello, and would love to have you talk for just a moment about what you do.
Sure. Thanks for having us here, Ty. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott D. Fussell. So yes, as Ty mentioned, Craig and I together run a company called Blitz, and we are focused on helping organizations that serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We help them attract and retain more of the amazing employees that they so desperately need right now. So we do that through a variety of services, and we do workshops and training for large groups. And we also do some one-on-one consulting, and it's focused around recruiting, retention, and culture. And ghosting is something that candidly wasn't on our radar about 4 years ago, but then conferences, webinars, a couple of years back, it became the number one question we'd get during Q&A sessions. So we've developed training to focus exclusively on that to help.
And one thing I want to add to what Scott said is very often the people we serve, they feel it's just them. They feel that's like, well, we don't pay enough, it's hard work, things like that. So that must be why people are ghosting. But as we'll get into in a minute, it's not them. It's not. So if you feel that, oh, well, it's only me being ghosted, you are not alone. You should not feel that it's just on you. Sadly, this is a big problem across industries.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. And I failed to introduce myself. My name is Ty Abernathy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Grayscale. We are a texting and automation platform focused specifically for high volume recruiting, designed to integrate with your ATS and just help to streamline the hiring process through SMS and kind of throughout the hiring process. Gentlemen, why don't we dive in and start talking about the problem of ghosting. Quick agenda for those of you on the call as far as what we're going to cover today. One, we're going to look at how big of a problem is candidate ghosting actually. We're going to talk about why it's happening. We're going to kind of geek out on the why behind it. Then we're going to start talking about like making a mindset shift. This was something that Craig and Scott kind of mentioned to me that I was really impressed by, but the idea of improving the problem starts with a shift in mindset toward the problem in general. And then we're going to get really tactical on some tips and tricks for how to address it. And then some common issues that we all see that arising as you start down the path of fixing ghosting. And then we're going to save Q&A for the end. We're going to try to save a lot of time for Q&A. Last one of these we did, we had a lot of questions. So please, as your questions come up, just drop them in the chat and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. So without further ado, let's dive in and get started. So how big of an issue is candidate ghosting? I would love to, Craig, maybe hear from you on this, given that you all do workshops devoted to this. How big of a problem do you see this being?
Yeah, it at times can be overwhelming. I mean, I think somebody just told us the other day too, that out of the last 10 applicants, only one responded. As I mentioned, this is not specific to our industry. So regardless of what you're in, Indeed did a survey and they, of about ghosting, and 83% of companies reported that ghosting was a problem. And quite frankly, I think the other 17% either didn't understand the question or weren't being truthful. I can't imagine any industry where ghosting isn't an issue right now. But the good thing is there are things you can do about it.
Yeah, and to kind of connect the dots on what Craig mentioned earlier about not being tied to money, there were numerous articles in the past couple of years on candidates even ghosting on jobs that pay them six figures a year. So it's not purely about money. Obviously, money is a factor, but when you're in a competitive field and there are lots of open positions, whether it's our field with direct support professionals or nursing, where you're competing for people, if they have lots of opportunities, they can feel that freedom and confidence that if something doesn't feel right and doesn't fit, I can go somewhere else and get a job regardless of money. So don't think that money is the sole driver.
Yeah, we're seeing something very similar. It feels like what started as a small subset of companies interested in working with Grayscale having ghosting issues to now it's the number one thing we hear when we first start working with companies is their biggest goal is to try to eliminate ghosting, at least to minimize it as a problem. That kind of leaky bucket dynamic that can often sort of happen in your hiring funnel, right, can be catastrophic, right? And so we know it's a big problem. For those of you experiencing it, like you're not alone, right? Which sometimes they can kind of feel that way. Let's now drill into the why behind this. Why is candidate ghosting happening? Scott, I'd love to get your perspective on the why behind this.
Yeah, sure thing. So it's easiest to just kind of step back, look at the hiring process, big picture, to see why it's going on, and look at things through the eyes of the candidate themselves, because they're looking for jobs. So it's just a web search away. They can go to Indeed. There are plenty of jobs listed there, and they are playing a numbers game. It's just apply now, apply now, apply now. And I'm sure you're seeing this because some of you undoubtedly see the same person apply 3 times, 4 times, 6 times, 10 times. And you're like, my gosh, why does this person keep on applying? Well, it's because they don't remember, because they're playing a numbers game. And you're thinking, why are they playing a numbers game? Well, unfortunately, they're playing the numbers game because they are being ghosted by other companies. Other companies are taking 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, 6 months to respond to legitimate candidates. So they just know that they need a job, they want a job, they're going to have to put a lot of applications out there and see who responds, because they don't know who's going to respond. So that's a big factor in driving their ghosting. They don't remember you. How can you remember when you applied 50 places yesterday?
Yeah, it's like that, the blessing and the curse of the easy apply button, right? We've over the years, it's been a big push to simplify the application process, which is a very good thing. But a negative byproduct of that, if someone can go into Indeed, for example, pull a search and just apply, this dynamic can start to play out. And it also results in a lot of noise for recruiters because they're getting bombarded with candidates that might be quasi-interested or quite frankly, not very interested in the opportunity, just given that they're going down the list and hitting apply. So it makes total sense. Kind of going a bit further, let's talk about the hiring process and sort of where some of this kind of breaks down.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they've gone through, they played the numbers game, and you're one of the lucky people out of 50 that they've applied that given day. And obviously you're focused on your process because it's your job. You've been through it hundreds, if not thousands of times. All the rules, regulations, checklists, procedures that you need to follow to do this properly. And you're focused on the events. So we have a sample hiring process here. You're focused on, okay, get them from the application, set up a phone screen. Then if that goes well, moves them on to the in-person interview, background check, and then on to hire. And obviously there are more steps in many of your processes, but this gives a simple overview. And those events are what you're focused on. But what we want to pay attention to, because it's easy to lose sight of it because you focus on the things that are naturally your job, those arrows in between are the points where ghosting is happening. And it's happening because time is passing in between. Like we said, other companies are ghosting on them. I've seen instances where some companies, because of how things are set up, it takes like 1 to 3 weeks just to get from that online application to the phone screen, because it's got to go through so many different levels of the organization. And people are juggling multiple responsibilities. So the more time that passes, the more likely they are to disappear, and you're going to lose them.
Mhm. Yeah, I think this is one of those things that, like, I think for those listening, it's probably like an obvious, like, yeah, I get it. Like, as there's gaps in the process, like, it's more likely that candidates are going to drop off, right? But I think rubber meets the road for an average recruiter dealing in some volume. There, it is nearly impossible. It feels nearly impossible to be able to speed up the hiring process, particularly back to all of this volume that's coming in that you're having to kind of process. And there's definitely some forces at play that I think that are that if you're not very intentional about addressing, can really kind of overwhelm and then can really slow down the process and create these gaps, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things we're going to try to unpack here a little bit is like how to be aware of some of those forces at play and how to start tightening up your process in order to make sure that you're maximizing conversion at each and every stage, right? So
and we realize it's tough because you're at the mercy of other people, regional hiring managers in some cases. The background check is often out of your hands, but there are things that you can do even if you can't shorten the time period in every instance.
Yep. And we'll kind of drill into that as we go here, but this is super helpful. Okay, so let's talk for a little bit about the first step in solving this problem. I would love to hear you gentlemen talk a little bit about sort of this mindset shift that needs to occur as you're looking to address the problem of ghosting.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is, of course, we're almost trained that, okay, we're the potential employer, we're in the position of power. But the truth of the matter is, in this day and age, the power is with the applicant. They have so many choices. The other thing is we sort of become self-defeating. Just as we showed that last slide with the steps in between the delays, that's where the car's breaking down. The child is sick. They're dealing with homeschooling right now. Maybe doubts, maybe they're starting to have second thoughts about the job they applied for, and they're beginning to wonder, is this the right fit for me? So rather than, we tend, when somebody ghosts us, we instantly sort of try to assume that, well, they're being rude, or they wouldn't have been a good fit anyway. Maybe they took another job. We're not looking at the possibility of maybe something embarrassing has happened in their personal life, or maybe their child is sick, or they're having to take care of a loved one. So, yeah, we shouldn't just be telling ourselves that they're rude and eliminating. There are some people who will ghost no matter what. There's some who will always show up, but there's that third category of people who they applied for the job with good intentions, but something has happened during the delays in your process that is causing them to not respond as quickly as you expect. So you can help yourself by just changing your mindset and looking at it rather than accept ghosting or assume that people are being rude. This is something you can be proactive, and you can turn a lot of those people who ghost you into new hires.
It's an interesting observation there, Craig, because I think, at least I know for me, when I get ghosted by a candidate, it's sort of my knee jerk to be like, well, they're just not interested. Like we've got a stable of, promising candidates that we need to keep working through. And so if you ghost, we're going to keep moving, right? Like that's a sign that it's not a great candidate. They're flaky, whatever. But what's interesting is like that is not always the case, right? It maybe some percentage fall into that category, but certainly a healthy percentage fall into a category of, maybe something's come up. They deserve the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think particularly in the dynamic we're in right now with COVID, that we are all just have a million plates that are spinning. We're trying to keep spinning in the air between family and work and all these things, and then add a pandemic to the mix. And so, I think, part of it too is like the onus is on the recruiter to over communicate, right? And to have as high a touch process as you possibly can, right? I remember you gave an example about when we were prepping for our discussion just around there being a recruiter who a candidate was had some reservations based on coming in to interview on site because of some COVID concerns.
Yeah, actually too, is that they had to, because our field requires background checks, they had to go get fingerprinted, and they just assumed that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be going probably to some federal building, I'll be standing in line, I'm going to get infected, or I'm at high risk for infection. And fortunately, our client reached out and said, no, look, they're breaking these things up by 15 minutes. You only see one person, they'll come out, they're wearing a mask, gloves, they'll take your temperature, they're wiping down things in between. So, and that's the thing with COVID right now. People, if your job entails contact with other people, whether it's a factory or it's a medical facility, people are understandably worried. Hey, wait a minute, I haven't gotten a vaccine yet, so am I going to be putting myself at risk? So it's an opportunity to share the steps you're taking as an organization to ensure the safety of your team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we'll get more into, I want to kind of talk more about that, communication process here in a second. I think one thing that we're seeing from a technology standpoint with the onset of as you are starting to kind of shift your mindset on how to communicate with candidates and how to effectively communicate with candidates during a pandemic and beyond, with the goal of eliminating ghosting. We see leveraging a channel like SMS as being the most effective way to relay those type of messages, right? That to coordinate details for that background check, to answer questions that someone may have, right? Just opening up a channel via SMS that, hey, if you have any questions, let us know. We're here for you. Like creating that high touch process, it makes such a huge difference. Just looking at some kind of basic, stats here as far as what we see across our customer base, and we work, a good degree in healthcare, but have a lot of e-com customers, manufacturing, technology, et cetera. It kind of runs the full gamut. What we consistently see is just about approaching 100% of all text messages are opened. 37% of them of candidates are replying, and they're replying within the first 6 minutes. Right? You compare that to email, and this just leveraging SMS as a channel, even if you're doing it poorly, it's going to give you a lift and just help to tighten up the process overall. But there's a kind of a right and wrong way, I'd say, to use any kind of channel as it relates to recruiting. And I think what you don't want to do is start leveraging a channel like SMS and then just like plop everything in there and make it more an announcement style. You really want to start a dialogue with the candidate and create a very personalized, tailored experience. I don't know if you guys have seen anything in this regards. I know this is kind of one area that you focus in on, but any thoughts here on sort of how to or not to approach the leveraging of SMS to kind of drive the process forward?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, if you're texting, you've taken the great first step, but so often what we see is something like this on screen, and it's a starting point and it can help reduce ghosting, but there's a lot of room for opportunity and improvement to reduce ghosting further because, candidly, especially if you're in the healthcare field, you're looking for people that are typically, warm, engaging, generally care about interacting and caring for individuals. And then, we're after that person, but what do? We hit them with a cold and impersonal message. This feels like it was approved by a team of lawyers before it was, sent through an automated system that you're not actually interacting with another human. And I mean, this is, heavily influenced by an example we saw with somebody we worked with. And I mean, this was being sent by a young, energetic, personal, recruiter working for an organization, and it did not convey her personality at all. But this is what she'd been told to work with. It's a starting point. When you say things like must be between business hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., it's like, we get it, you have a schedule, but there's a way we can convey that same message, but do it with a little more, compassion and not so hard line in the sand and standoffish.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to tie in the stats that Ty just shared a little bit. sometimes we hear from our clients too, is like, well, I don't want to text because I don't text. It's unprofessional. I'm too old to text, which always amuses me because I'm almost always the oldest person in the room during our workshops, and I text. The reason the text works so well is you get a phone call from somebody, if you have caller ID, you don't recognize the number, you don't answer. Emails can be picked off by spam folders. We get texts, we get that little bubble that pops up on our smartphone. You at least look at it. So, and that's where too, and it'll lead into what Scott's going to share too about adding some personality. It's a great opportunity to catch somebody's eye by adding a little bit of personality to that text.
Yeah. And when you see your phone light up with that type of message that was just on screen, it's your instant reaction may probably be, oh, all right, who is this? What is this about? This seems very formal. Is this real? Is it not real? And again, back to they're applying for tons of jobs, so they don't recognize the number. Maybe your company name doesn't pass through to their phone. So this isn't a great start to the relationship and interaction with them.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned you used the word relationship, and I do think that there, to put on our marketing hat for a second, it's, these touch points all build relationships with you, with your brand, and how you communicate matters. These little things actually add up. And I know it seems like such a small, insignificant thing, but we'll look at in a second some recommendations for how to communicate and why that's so important. But the even leveraging a channel like SMS, if you do it in a cold, mechanical, robotic fashion, it's not going to deliver the same results as if you are communicating in a personalized, high touch manner. More on that here in a second, as we kind of segue into some tips and tricks for combating ghosting, right? So why don't we dig in? I think we've got a couple tips that I think are going to be very actionable kind of straight away. So I want to kind of dive into some of these. One, back to the slide we were just looking at previously, like you've seen what not to do. Here's more of a style of what you should do, right? Sending, not just, notification style messages, but sending personalized messages. And we see like sending messages, reminder messages for upcoming interviews being a big step in addressing candidate ghosting. Scott or Craig, would love to hear your perspective on what you're seeing with some of your customers implementing something like this.
Sure. So the story that comes to mind to, I think, best illustrate this is one of our favorites. So we were doing a workshop series, and we started off, back when we could do events in person, pre-pandemic. There was one woman who were talking about this, and she's like, guys, what you're saying makes total sense. And then she proudly held up her flip phone and she's like, but I'm just not interested. I don't want to text. I've got my flip phone. I love my flip phone. It's not easy to text on it. I'm good right now. And then in the last part of the workshop series, she stood up in front of everyone and she's like, guys, can I just interrupt you? I want to tell you something. And I had no idea what was coming. And Deb told us, she's like, she held up her new smartphone and she said, guess what? I've got a new phone. My carrier told me they would no longer support my flip phone. So I had to get a smartphone, and I decided when I got it, well, I might as well give what these guys are talking about a try. So she's been texting candidates. She's been adding her personality into it, doing things like using emojis and just using her warmth to connect and start those relationships with candidates. And she said she has a new employee that commented to her, hey, Deb, I just got to tell you, when I was going through the hiring process, I was hanging out with my mom, and my mom saw my phone light up with one of your notifications and read the text message, saw the personality, saw the emojis, and it caught her eye. And she's like, I don't know who these people are, but you're talking to them, right? Like, you really should interview and look at them, because this seems different. They have personality, and they got a great new employee from that. So she was so enthused that she took the leap.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Yeah. And again, like it's the bar's pretty low here. You look at what most employers are doing, right? They're sending out notification style communication via email, right? And so to send a personalized text to someone it still conveys this like, oh, whoa, I'm getting a message from a recruiter at this company. It's still an uncommon thing. And so uncommon in the sense that like it stands out, right?
Yeah.
We've all gotten, messages, notifications from our dentist or doctor about an upcoming visit we have, right? And that feels very normal. And oh, great, I forgot to put that on my calendar. Thanks for reminding me. So you can send out these reminder style messages day before the interview, morning of, just with the same intention as a friendly reminder, but also adding a lot of personality to help kind of build rapport with that candidate. And the more rapport you build, the less likely they're going to be to just ghost somebody. If they've been communicating with a human, we all are much more prone to ghost someone that we have not interacted with, right? Like think about like how easy it is to have like road rage when you're driving and like can't see anybody else and don't interact with anybody else. But when you're like, in line for something and you bump into someone, it's like, oh, excuse me, everyone's friendly as they could possibly be, right? It's like, texting is sort of the digital equivalent of like being in person with someone versus being in the car with the, your knuckles white as you're like angry for some guy, cut you off. So it's that sort of thing. Regardless of what kind of technology you use, there's some great, technology out there to allow you to automate some of this personalization as well. So for our Grayscale customers, they'll plug Grayscale into their ATS and then just put a template in place that will personalize these messages in mass, right? So you can build rapport in a scalable way, right? That's something we see being really effective, is starting to automate some of this communication, but not automate to the point where you're putting a wall up and it's impersonal. You want to personalize things and just supercharge your efforts and the high touch efforts that you're doing through the aid of some automation that's running in the background for you. So
you can also add some real function, some helpful function to these personalized messages. If they're coming in for an in-person interview, if you put the address in, the smartphone's going to turn that into a link to their mapping app.
Yeah.
Same thing with a phone call. Or how about if we've been to places where it's like, which door do I go in? You can text them a picture with highlighting, what door do I come in? There's so many things you can do to make it easy. And people are inherently, the easier you make it, the more likely they are to follow through.
Yep, exactly. It's it's eliminating friction in the process, right? And in the sales world, that's the goal. You want to just eliminate all friction, because friction kills all deals, and it slows things down, and and it's the same with hiring. Why don't we, in the interest of time, I see some questions coming in, and for those of you that have questions, just drop them in the Q&A. We'll be doing Q&A here in a few moments, but let's jump into tip number 2. So if a candidate ghosts, lead with compassion. This came directly from both of you guys, and I'd love to have you speak to it, because I thought this was a really helpful insight into how to treat candidates.
Sure. So this came from, we learned this from the people that we work with. A number of the organizations we work with have taken the Bridges Out of Poverty training, and they talk about understanding, the people that are applying for your job, the challenges they're up against in their personal life, and that there are very legitimate reasons why at times they ghost and things don't go as planned. And to just, you have all this compassion, use it, reach out with compassion. Yes, it is frustrating, and I totally get reacting that, oh man, I can't believe Sarah ghosted me for the interview today. All right, she's disqualified. She's not a good fit. Like, she can't even be bothered to show up by an interview. Mm-hmm. But if we push beyond that reaction, there's likely a reason. Maybe it's a good reason, maybe it's not, but we don't know that story, as Craig talked about earlier. So just start real simple and reach out with compassion, because Ty, as you said a moment ago, like, yeah, this is uncommon in a good way. Nobody else is going to be doing this. Mm-hmm. So, and maybe you find out the rest of the story and they're very apologetic, like, hey, something came up, my mom's sick and I had to take to her doctor's appointment unexpectedly. So you'll never know if you never reach out. And this is just 2 sentences. It doesn't take any extra time out of your day, and it could get you a great employee. So it's worth it.
We even had one situation where somebody who in the first day of or first week of work, who was looking like he was going to be a great employee, stopped coming. And it turned out, his supervisor just would not let it rest. Didn't just say, oh, well, he's like so many other people. They just stopped coming to work. They blew us off. They ghosted. He reached out and found out this young man's mother had died unexpectedly. So he was able to work with him, and the guy just said, well, I didn't bother calling because I know I don't have any accrued time off or anything. I probably shouldn't even applied for the job or something. So I just heard, what's the use? And I said, no, we'll work with you, give you some unpaid leave, but we'll welcome you back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, again, it's jumping to assumptions, which is very easy to do. Again, and when you're dealing in high volume recruiting, it's very easy to kind of jump to those conclusions. But that's not the right posture to have, right? I think this is a clear example of leading with compassion. And then I think that's a good segue into, the third tip, making a final attempt, and as you gentlemen call it, closing the loop. And I'd love to hear you speak to sort of the value of this message as well.
Sure. So, the situation, you don't know the full story. It's, it's like a cliffhanger in a TV series. You don't know why they've ghosted, but our mind is really good at trying to close that loop and make up a story, and it's not productive. And we guess all sorts of worst case scenarios, and we feel powerless and frustrated. But here's something productive we can do from a couple standpoints. This is a last ditch effort, like Hail Mary. You can rest easy knowing that you've done everything you possibly can when you've reached this point where it's your last try, and close the loop with them, and just reach out. And, Ty, you've mentioned it a couple of times, marketing and sales. This is where this comes from. And you can just say something very simple. Hey, Sarah, I haven't heard from you, so I'm going to assume you've taken another job. Best of luck. What you're doing is just telling them, goodbye, I'm not chasing you anymore. And when you do that, you're going to get a percentage of people that are going to come back to life instantly and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Ty. This came up. Like, no, I'm still interested. I promise. Can we reschedule? And suddenly they're pursuing you, and they're apologetic, and you're back in touch with them, and things might work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've talked about, with you gentlemen, your focus is in a niche within healthcare. And I think, the application here obviously is well beyond that of healthcare. And in each vertical probably represented on this call, there are certain types of roles that are tremendously difficult to hire, particularly in volume, right? And so, whether it be RNs or it be software engineers or it be, that customer care professional, whatever your vertical, I think it is, giving these candidates the benefit of the doubt, and also understanding how difficult it is to engage them in the first place. Having these 1 to 2 additional follow-ups. We call them nudges at Grayscale, that are just there to, like, we're all busy. We all have a million things going on, and we as recruiters have to do everything we can to be perceived as the employer of choice and to create a high touch experience. And again, you can, regardless of what technology you're using, there's simple ways that you can even start to automate some of these nudges that will go out only if candidates don't take certain actions, right? So they just kind of work for you in the background. But however you do it, whether it's picking up your smartphone or whatever else to message the candidate, take these follow-up steps, particularly for your highest value roles, those hardest to fill, those that are most challenging to kind of wrangle candidates in. This will work. You will see impact here. And with that in mind, want to briefly kind of touch on some of the results we're seeing for some of these things. So these are not kind of nominal, figures here. We see as customers start to implement the combination of these tactics and technology, you see a boost in interview sit rate by approaching 50%, reduction in time to fill of just over 20%. And then you're seeing like meaningful hours being saved in the process because you're creating a tighter process. It's moving faster with less drop off. So it allows you to speed things up and eliminate a lot of that rework that happens when you're scrambling to continue to fill that backlog with promising candidates. So all these things kind of add up to something pretty meaningful in a hiring process, to really combat ghosting, right? Now I want to talk about some common issues and how to address them. And I want to go back to, so Scott, we were talking before about the hiring process and the slide where you kind of mapped out the different stages in the process. I'd love to hear, let's talk about common issue number one, these bottlenecks in the process that slow things down, and what is an acceptable turnaround time to get back to candidates, right? Because I think many people on this call are kind of feeling like, yeah, it takes me a week to get back, but it's because all these other things are happening. We probably list a dozen things, but it's hard to kind of know what the North Star should be. So talk to me about like what you see as far as like, what are some good SLAs to put in place as far as how quickly you should get back to candidates at various different stages in the process?
Sure. So generally what Craig and I see, let's hone in on somebody's applied online and you're trying to set up that initial step, most likely a phone screen with that person. The organizations that we see having far less trouble with ghosting are getting back to that candidate within 24 hours or 48 hours at the most. And then we see a big jump. We'll see organizations where it takes a week or more to get back to people, most likely bigger organization where there are lots of different people involved. Candidates have to go to hiring managers, and that hiring manager is also in charge of a whole bunch of other things. Hiring is just one small part of their job. And it's like they let candidates build up for a week, like forget to check the ATS, log in, check the pool of candidates and get back to them. And then by that time, those candidates are dead ends, unfortunately. So that time is really important.
Got it. Yeah. So to put a fine point on it, then, I mean, we're at every stage really looking to get back within 24 hours whenever possible, but not letting that slide more than 48 hours.
And obviously, that's not possible in certain situations, especially with background checks. If you have to go through a certain company and it just takes time, we totally get that. You can't speed it up. But what you can control is your communication with them during that time. You can apply the concepts we've talked about, come alongside them, use your compassion, use your empathy, and just let them know, hey, I have not forgotten you. We're still waiting on the results from the background check company. Let me know if you have any questions. It's a great opportunity to get some more of your personality out there. If you've got like a 1-minute YouTube video from one of your employees talking about the job, how great it is, an overview, something like that, just so that you're in their mind and you're interacting with them and keeping that conversation going.
Yeah, we've actually helped clients where we will draft messages for them to text at each one of those steps too, because obviously you can probably get back to somebody pretty quickly after they apply for that initial screening. But as Scott mentioned, our people in particular, very often they have no control over how fast those background checks come back. So there's the opportunity where you're going to want to reach out more often and do things that excite people and make them think, I want that job.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think looking at that, I mean, trying to keep these tight turnaround times, right, this is what we see as like being one of the most challenging things in combating ghosting. It's like having a way to consistently reach back out to candidates in that 24 to 48 hour window to really make that connection in that proper amount of time. And so for those of you where that feels a little bit daunting of a task to try to tackle, look for ways to start to kind of streamline things. If you're using an ATS, look for ways to trigger communication off of a stage change, and so with customers we work with, we'll help them set up their process to where a candidate applies, a few hour delay, they'll get a text, thanks for reaching out, we'll be in touch, followed by, once the candidate advances to the next stage, a text going out, hey, we've reviewed your information, would love to move forward with you in the process, how's your availability look for next week, followed by an interview reminder, and all the recruiter's having to do is just advance the candidate, step to step. And all this is happening on your behalf, if not immediately with a slight delay, but very quickly, making it easy to kind of automate some of this. So you're very simply able to get back to candidates in that window of 24 to 48 hours, right? And so things like that, however you go about doing it, set up a process that allows for some of this to happen for you, so you're not having to do everything manually. The more you can start to automate some of this, I know automation is a little bit of a dirty word, right? Because it feels like more robotic and impersonal, but a human-centric process with the right level of automation woven in is what we find is sort of the secret sauce. That sweet sort of automation can complement what you do and make you feel more human and personalized, and far more so than if you're trying to brute force everything on your own, right? So leverage technology when you can.
And I'd say, to add to that quickly, in line with that, it starts with having it documented, because so many recruiters that I talk to and people in HR, I'm like, okay, let's pretend for a moment that you've just hired me and I'm going to be one of your recruiters. Like, give me the playbook documentation. Like, how am I interacting with people? And I get a very confused look like, we don't have anything written down. What do you mean? So it makes it really tough for you, if you're in charge, to go on vacation, leave, because you feel that pressure of, I've got to be there because I'm the one interacting and I'm the one who's on the ball and I'm getting back to people quickly. And if I leave it in somebody else's hands, they're not as quick, or they don't know what to do. So that first step toward automation can be that documentation and thinking through, okay, what messages need to happen at which stages. That way other people on the team can know what to do.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Grab a whiteboard and map out what the process needs to look like. Where are our biggest gaps right now? How do we start to minimize those gaps? Where can we layer in technology and automation to help ensure we hit these SLAs that we determine are acceptable turnaround times for candidates throughout the process, right? Like, that's how it begins. You kind of start with the basics, to Scott's point, lay out a process, get a whiteboard and start to map it out, and then start to look for opportunities to layer in technology and automation to help keep it, to provide a consistent experience throughout. Because for those of you dealing in volume, like, consistency is not something that is that's easily achieved, right? And as it relates to the candidate experience. So again, technology can help with that where appropriate. So what we're going to do here real quick, we're going to shift, and I'm going to throw a poll up on the screen for you all to see if you'd like to connect with us. We're going to, we have plenty of time for some Q&A. I see questions rolling in. We're going to touch on those in a moment. So please drop questions in, but also quick poll for you to see if you'd like any additional information on Grayscale and what we do, or Blitz Media and some of the workshops that they get involved in as well. So please let us know, and we'll start the Q&A here in a few moments. We're going to give it another few seconds here, and then we're going to jump to Q&A. So please, while we're waiting, just be thinking about what kind of questions you have, and go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. We'll be using Q&A to field questions as we go. And so please drop those in, and we'll tackle those one by one here. All right, so we're going to call this poll to an end. And we're going to now jump to Q&A. And I'm going to pull up, so we've got some questions rolling in here. All right, one question that's come in is about onboarding. So do some of the tactics we've talked about work for the onboarding process as well? That's a very good question. The short answer is yes, absolutely. And it's interesting you bring that up, because we see ghosting also happening post-hire, right? And I don't know, Scott, I see you nodding your head.
Oh, yeah.
The post-hire ghosting is probably even more it's even more frustrating than the pre-hire, because you get someone, hired, everything's in place, background check done, and then they don't show up for day one, or they show up for day one and then don't show up again, whatever it may be. But that can be so discouraging. And yes, these tactics actually work, and you can, the same way, and I'll just kind of speak to Grayscale. What we see working well is the continuation of what we talked about before, map out your onboarding journey, right? From hire to start date and beyond, and everything the candidate needs to know for day one and beyond. And then start to map out like, all right, what are the touch points that we need to give to the candidate, and like use the same channel you've been using throughout the hiring process for onboarding. Leverage SMS, layer in some automation so they're getting that right communication points personalized at the right points in time, leading up to the start date, on start date, end of start date, or next day, asking for feedback. How'd your first day go, right? Surface things before they become problems. What do you guys see? I'd love to hear from both of you on just the onboarding dynamic there.
Oh, 100% with what you said. Yeah, it's a missed opportunity for a lot of people, and it doesn't take much. And extend what you just mentioned. How was your first day? I'm a fan of just adding a little bit to it, and hey, how's your first day? Just rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, because if you ask people how they're doing, you're going to get a lot of autopilot responses as we think of them. I'm good, not too bad. Things like that where people are just polite. They don't even think, they just answer. But if you ask them a question like, how was your first day on a scale of 1 to 10? It causes them to pause, think about it, and it gives you an opportunity to start a conversation. And, maybe they're honest with you. They give you, well, Ty, it was a 6. Oh, sorry to hear it was a little rough. Like, what happened? I want to know, what could we do better? Again, it gives that opportunity for dialogue and discussion. And that's going to overcome a lot of ghosting, because people are ghosting because it doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel like a fit. It feels like they made a mistake. They're nervous about the job. It's information overload for them in the early stages. So there are plenty of doubts, plenty of places to go, new people to meet. They're overwhelmed, and it's all too easy to go back to the familiar of like, well, I'll go search for another job, or I have another offer. Maybe that'll be right for me.
Or if your onboarding is a multi-day process, you can help set the expectations. Here's what you can expect tomorrow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think the expectation setting is a big part of it, right? And again, not to overuse an analogy, but back to that driving example, the more you've built a relationship with someone throughout the process, the more likely that they're going to like lean in, give you feedback, respond to your messages, show up when they should. The more like impersonal a process is in general, even if you get someone through it, the less likely someone is that they're going to start on day one, because they don't have any meaningful relationship that's been built up with your brand, with you, the recruiter, and all of those little touch points by the time a hire's made add up to something meaningful. And so we see, part of, it's all interconnected there, right? And so, all right, so I want to shift gears to field a few more questions that.
And one quick point on that. That's that relationship is key. I know oftentimes it's like your work is kind of done as an HR professional when they're hired, but you have a great opportunity. Their first experience with you was positive. You said you're hired, welcome to the team. So you can be that lifeline for people, and it helps get you out of the uncomfortable, situation. I know at many companies that, HR is coming in like, who's in trouble? The bad cop is here. So if you interact with them, through onboarding and check in on them, you're much more likely to succeed.
Yeah. So next question we have here is about just getting stakeholder buy-in. So we've got a recruiter on the line who is bought into implementing some of these tactics and technology and changes, but like, what happens? Like, where do you go from there? Like, how do you get buy-in for some of these things? I may pose that to you, gentlemen. I think you get more in the weeds here. I'd love to get your perspective.
Well, in one of our cases too, we found that one of the people who worked with us said, people don't ghost anymore. That of her last 17 applicants, 15 showed up. She did get a conversation with one, the other she never could connect with. So when you look at it, particularly if you're desperate to hire people, getting more of the people who've applied to actually show up and engage in your process, that's going to save you time and money. Ty had that one slide, but I mean, the truth of the matter is, the field we are in, once they've been onboarded and undergone initial training, the average investment in our field is about $4,000. So it's a case, if, imagine if right now, if your process is such that 10 people who go through the onboarding and start work just disappear at the end of the first week, you get frustrated, you're angry, but nobody's presenting you with that invoice for $40,000. So if there's something you can do that's minimal effort that can help reduce the number of turnover, that can mean some very real world savings. And going back to what Ty said, whether it's an automation system or whether it's as simple as something like just storing messages on the Notes app of your smartphone, or using the automated keyboard expanders that come on all smartphones, it's a start. And anything you can do to make it easy. Plus, I'm always amused by people who say, well, I don't text. And yet it's kind of amusing. We're all texting from our smartphones. It's a phone. We could call and talk to people. There are two advantages of text. Number one, everybody looks at bubble. Number two, it does give the person time to think about a response rather than putting them on the spot.
Yep.
So these things can be very effective and help overcome some barriers.
And Ty, in relation to getting buy-in, this is where we often hear that, oh, well, it's not professional to text. And you mentioned the dentist and doctor's office texting you reminders. I don't think at any point you've ever gotten one of those text messages and gone, oh my gosh, that's it, I'm switching. Man, I can't believe they texted me. They're so unprofessional. No, we don't think that. So there's nothing to overcome there. It's professional. Getting people to show up is professional. Like just letting the status quo keep on happening is not professional. So change some perspectives by looking at it that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, so I want to thank everyone for taking time with us out of their busy day today. We've really enjoyed our chat. Hope it's been value add. We'll be sending out a recording after today's session. So if you'd like to share it with other team members, you'll get a copy of this recorded as well. And if you have any follow-up questions for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Actually, Ty, I spotted one other question somebody was asking about, and it's a common question we get about, they don't want to give up their personal phone number to candidates. Now, I assume, does Grayscale provide like a number?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we provision a separate phone number, so you're not using your personal cell phone number. Exactly.
Yeah, and the other thing we tell people, and quite frankly, it's what Scott and I have been using all along. Our office number is a Google Voice number, so we can both text from our office number and not give up, because there's an app on our phone, so we can just go ahead and text from that. But of course, obviously, then we are manually doing things with. It's not like we can automate our responses or make them part of a system like you were talking about. But it's a good first step. And Scott and I are big believers in imperfect action. So, but yeah, you can always, and for personal use, Google Voice numbers are free.
Yeah, and I think back to sort of impersonal action, right? Is like don't try to perfect it straight out of the gate. Just take action, right? Take a step, however small, crawl. Then you can learn to walk, and then you'll be running before you know it. That is the best way to start tackling some of these things. As you start thinking like, whoa, there's so much that I can't, it's overwhelming and I don't know where to start. Start with something small, right? To Craig's point, just grab your smartphone and start messaging. Get a free service like Google Voice. Start there. Then as you start to realize, hey, we need to start to scale this up, then look for other ways to leverage technology to start to scale this up and integrate in your systems, and you'll be running before you know it. So let me do a quick scan before we call it. I think we've got another question coming in. I'm having trouble seeing the Q&A on my end. Craig, if you could read that. Look, I think we have a final question that's come through.
Just somebody, the last one was not a question. My company uses Ring Central. It's a great tool. So I assume that's a common phone number.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Similar sort of.
And I certainly understand why you wouldn't want to give up a personal number, but find a way.
Yep.
And we talk about imperfect action. This is kind of comical because Scott and I are recovering perfectionists, but perfection's the enemy of good. So one of our mentors is big on, he says, decide, act with fearless imperfection, learn, and then repeat.
Love that.
And that can be so empowering. And I think that's why texting works. It's easy to do. I think you'll find it in some ways too. I mean, I stop and think about it. Sometimes if you're going to have a phone call, you sort of have to build up your energy, get yourself in the right frame of mind, particularly if you were following up with a candidate that you're frustrated. It's hard to get that frustration out. Whereas if you have a template of a personal message that you can send them, you could be frowning while you're texting them, but because you have that template, it's going to come through as a positive interaction.
Love it. Yep. That's as a former recruiter, I can relate to that, like needing to build up that energy and sort of get the face on before you jump on a call with someone. Yeah. Texting, you have it kind of preset, ready to go, boom, fire it off, and off you go. Right. Well, great. Well, this concludes our webinar. Thank you all so much for taking some time. And please don't hesitate to reach out if we can answer any follow-up questions for you. And again, Craig and Scott, thanks so much for taking time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ty. We appreciate it.